Okay, the last thing that we have to cover with these is finding the domain as far as when we are dealing with an equation. Okay, so say I was given an equation that was like y equals square root of x minus 2. Okay, what is our concern in dealing with square roots? Pause and think for a second. What have we worried about that would make that equation bad? The answer to that, hopefully, would be if we have negatives under the root. Okay, up until this year, if you had the square root of -4, you guys were told that was no solution. Now, we have found out that there is actually a solution to this. -4 does equal 2i. So it's not that there is no solution, it is that there is no real number as a solution. We have to use imaginary numbers to solve for those there. Okay, so what we need to know about square roots is that the negative numbers make them bad. And you guys can see if you look here, we don't have, like, there are no negative values for x on this function. And that is because of how this function works, okay? So we've learned from the graph. You guys can look at the graph of this and see that x must be greater than 2. But if we don't have the graph, how can we go about finding the domain of these equations? So let's go ahead and practice. We need to make sure that there are no negatives underneath the root. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to list, hey, what's our concern? Well, right now we've only had one concern, and it is that there are negatives under the root. I cannot have negatives underneath the root. So what is underneath the root? Well, if I look at this, I've got a 2x minus 3 that is underneath the root. So I need to make sure what's under the root, that 2x minus 3, I need to make sure that it is not negative. So if I need to make sure that it is not negative, that means that I need to make sure that it is greater than 0. Okay? Because all of your positive numbers are greater than 0. What else do I need besides just that it's greater than 0? Could it equal 0? Well, yes, 0 is also not a negative number. So basically, when you have this concern that you have negatives underneath the root, you must set under the root to be greater than or equal to 0. And once I set what's under the root to be greater than or equal to 0, I just solve for x. So I can add 3 to both sides. 2x is greater than or equal to 3. I can divide by 2, and I get that x is greater than or equal to 3 halves. So we're going to do some practice here. It says find the domain of the following functions. Okay, so we are going to, our only concern is that we have a negative under the root. That's our concern that we're dealing with here. So I need to look what's under it. Well, the only part that is under the root is 3 minus 5x. So I'm going to set 3 minus 5x to be greater than or equal to 0. Doesn't matter about the 4 on the outside. The only concern I have is what's underneath the root. Okay? I will then subtract my 3 to the other side, divide both sides by -5. You do need to remember, if we divide by a negative, we do have to flip that sign. So it becomes x is less than or equal to a positive 3/5. And that is your domain for this function. Okay, last one we have here, again, we're finding the domain. Only concern is what is under the square root. So our concern is under the root being negative. So I am going to set that x minus 3 to be greater than or equal to 0. Tells me that my domain is x is greater than or equal to 3. Okay, there is one more special case that we need to address, and that is going to be if you are dealing with cubed roots. Okay, now when you're dealing with a cubed root here, we remember our function, shifted right 1, shifted up 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so this is what our graph looks like here when I have these things, my cubed root graphed. Okay, so what is our concern here? The answer to that is none. It is okay to have negatives under cube roots. So the fact that that is a cubed root there tells me that I have no concerns, which means that my domain is all real numbers. And you guys can see from the graph, is there anything stopping this thing going to the right? No. Is there anything stopping this thing going to the left? No. So the reason that it's all real numbers is because we don't have a concern. We're not concerned about having negatives underneath a cubed root. Okay? And then that is it for additional lesson 6.